The fabric of the Null Realm did not just tear, it screamed. A jagged fissure of violet and black light violently ripped through the absolute emptiness, fracturing the invisible boundaries of time itself. Son Goku roared, his aura detonating into the blinding silver fire of autonomous Ultra Instinct, his hands desperately thrust outward to hold back the collapsing walls of reality. Beside him, Vados, her usually serene eyes wide with an unfamiliar, deeply mortal panic, gripped her staff as its celestial orb cracked under the crushing gravity of a dying dimension. This was not a battle against a mortal foe. This was an execution, a temporal prison, locked from the outside by forces beyond even the gods of destruction, was sealing them within a void where a single heartbeat stretched into an eternity. The crushing dark flooded in, swallowing the brilliant light of the Saiyan and the desperate grace of the angel. As the final sliver of the multiverse faded from view, leaving only a suffocating, inescapable silence, the cage slammed shut. They were abandoned to the dark, sentenced to wander a lightless eternity for 5,000 years. Before the rift closes forever and this lost timeline is erased from the grand cosmic record, lend us your energy. Stay with us, lest the legend of their exile fade into the silent dark. The screaming rift had sealed, and in its wake came a silence so absolute it possessed a gravity of its own. This was not the quiet of a peaceful night on Earth, nor the serene, meditative stillness of the Kaioshin realm. It was the oppressive, predatory silence of a null dimension, a cage woven from the very fabric of erasure. There was no up, no down, no distant stars to chart a course by, and no ambient energy to draw into the lungs. It was an aggressive non-existence that immediately began the press against the intruders, eager to dissolve their vibrant presence into its endless dark sea. Son Goku refused to be dissolved. His Saiyan blood, a genetic tapestry woven with defiance, screamed against the sensory deprivation. With a guttural roar that died inches from his own face, he ignited his ki. The golden fires of the Super Saiyan flared, only to be instantly smothered by the crushing atmosphere. He pushed harder, plunging into the divine reservoirs of his power. The cerulean blaze of Super Saiyan Blue erupted, casting brief, harsh shadows on the nothingness. But the void drank the light greedily, snuffing it out in seconds. Finally, desperate and gasping, he tapped into his ultimate state. The blinding, ethereal silver of autonomous Ultra Instinct enveloped him. Yet without an opponent to react to, without an environment to flow through, the autonomous movements became frantic and erratic. Every martial art Goku had ever mastered relied on connection. The friction of air, the solidity of the earth, the opposing force of an enemy's strike. Here, his martial arts were ghosts. He threw a devastating right hook into the abyss, putting his entire physical weight behind it, but the momentum simply spun him off balance, sending him drifting helplessly. The lack of tactile feedback was maddening. He was a creature defined by his limits and his relentless drive to shatter them. But how could he shatter a wall that wasn't there? How could he fight a prison that refused to take shape? His immense power was rendered completely meaningless, swallowed by an infinite sponge of dark matter. Exhausted, the silver heat retreated, leaving him floating in his base form, his chest heaving as the crushing reality of their situation settled over his shoulders. A few meters away, Vados remained perfectly still, though her internal world was collapsing in unprecedented ruin. For eons, her consciousness had existed within a vast, shimmering web of divine connection. She had always felt the comforting, low-frequency hum of the Grand Priest, the distinct, colorful energy signatures of her angelic siblings, and the chaotic, vibrant symphony of the 12 universes. Now, there was only a horrifying, deafening static. The angelic network was gone. She reached out with her mind, projecting her consciousness as far as her divine limits would allow. But she hit a terminal boundary of absolute zero. She was severed, untethered. Her graceful fingers tightened around her staff. The celestial orb at its apex, which had perpetually swirled with the dust of newborn galaxies and the light of distant suns, was dead. It was merely a cold, lifeless sphere of hollow glass. Vados lowered the staff, a gesture of physical defeat she had never once performed in all her millennia of existence. The concept of a 5,000-year sentence, handed down by the unseen forces that had sealed this realm, had initially seemed trivial to an immortal. She had watched stars burn out and empires turn to dust in the blink of a cosmic eye. But that was time observed from the outside, time measured by change and motion. Here, time was stagnant. It did not flow like a river. It pooled like black tar. Without the rotation of planets or the steady march of entropy to mark its passage, a single second stretched into an excruciating, motionless eternity. Goku drifted closer to her, his breaths loud and ragged in the vacuum. The sheer panic of a warrior trapped in a cage with no bars was etched into the tension of his jaw. He looked to his guide, expecting the usual dry wit, the composed smile, the effortless divine solution to a universal problem. But as their eyes met in the suffocating dark, Goku saw something that chilled him deeper than the ambient temperature of the void. In the violet depths of the angel's eyes, the unshakable foundation of divine neutrality had cracked. Behind the pristine facade, Vados was experiencing the very first, terrifying tremors of a uniquely mortal affliction: fear. The darkness began to creep closer, an invisible tide rising to claim them, as the cold reality of their eternal burial set in. Time in the Null Realm did not pass. It accumulated. It was a heavy, suffocating sediment, pressing down upon their consciousness. Without the rotation of celestial bodies, the shifting of tides, or the rhythmic pulse of cosmic energy, a day and a century were utterly indistinguishable. Goku measured the early, agonizing epochs of their confinement in heartbeats and exhausted breaths. Driven by the primal, unyielding engine of his Saiyan blood, he waged a frantic, one-sided war against the dark. He threw billions of strikes, his fists carving hollow, meaningless arcs through the emptiness. He screamed until his vocal cords tore, roaring furious challenges to the unseen wardens of their prison, desperate for even a single echo to prove he still existed. But the void was a flawless sponge. It drank his fury, his kinetic energy, and his sound, leaving him adrift in a paralyzing, absolute quiet. Slowly, the terrible reality of complete sensory deprivation began to dismantle the universe's greatest warrior. His mind, conditioned to react to the micro-shifts in an opponent's stance, the displacement of air, or the sudden flare of hostile ki, began to misfire. He saw phantoms in the black, shadows of Jiren, of Frieza, of Broly, dancing just out of reach, only for his desperate, retaliatory strikes to meet nothing but the same unforgiving vacuum. The physical toll was secondary to the spiritual starvation. A Saiyan is a creature of friction, a being forged in the heat of resistance and the joy of overcoming walls. Without a barrier to push against, without an enemy to conquer, or a world to protect, Goku's spirit began to wither. His once blinding aura, the light that had challenged the gods, was reduced to a desperate, flickering ember, barely visible in the oppressive night. Vados observed his unraveling with a mounting, entirely unfamiliar terror. Stripped of the Grand Priest's sustaining grace, the innate divine insulation that had protected her from the trivialities of mortal suffering began to erode. She who had guided gods of destruction through the violent births and cold deaths of galaxies with a detached, serene smile, now felt the creeping, icy fingers of entropy. The luminescent halo that hovered around her neck, the eternal symbol of her angelic status, flickered violently, its crystalline light dulling to a sickly, pale gray. Her perfectly manicured poise fractured. For the first time since the dawn of her creation, Vados felt cold. It was not a physical chill, but a profound, existential freezing of the soul. She was becoming terrifyingly, irreversibly finite. The established dynamic between them, the bemused, untouchable master and the eager, endlessly striving student, dissolved under the crushing pressure of their shared doom. Goku finally ceased his phantom battles. He surrendered to the drift, pulling his knees to his chest, his eyes hollow and vacant as the void threatened to finally claim the fire behind them. Seeing the unbreakable Saiyan shattered, tore away the very last vestiges of Vados' divine protocol. She did not approach him with her staff, nor did she offer a philosophical lecture on the fluid nature of reality. She drifted toward him simply as another soul drowning in the deep. Reaching out through the oppressive dark, her trembling pale fingers closed gently over his calloused wrist. The physical contact sent a sudden, shocking jolt through the absolute Zeno of their prison. It was a meager, desperate friction, but in a realm entirely devoid of all things, It was a universe unto itself. Goku's dull eyes shifted, focusing slowly on the fallen angel beside him. In that silent, heavy exchange, the illusion of their separate, hierarchical existences shattered completely. The void had stripped away the guide and the mortal, leaving only two dying embers facing the end of eternity. If they remained apart, they would freeze into forgotten cosmic dust. But as Goku's hand shifted, weakly but deliberately returning her grasp, a microscopic tremor of warmth pulsed between them. A fragile, defiant spark threatening to rebel against the lightless grave. That single point of contact became the epicenter of a quiet revolution, where the void had successfully devoured every explosive burst of Super Saiyan fury and every erratic flash of Ultra instinct. It could not consume the microscopic, localized friction of two souls clinging to one another. Goku's pulse, which had been slowing toward a cold, depressive crawl, hitched. The touch of Vados' hand did not offer the adrenaline of a charging enemy, but it provided something infinitely more crucial in the suffocating dark. Proof of reality. It was a sensory anchor. He focused entirely on the shape of her fingers, the smooth, icy texture of her skin, and the faint, almost imperceptible tremble of her palm against his own. Instinctively, Goku's approach to his own power began to fundamentally shift. For a lifetime, his martial arts had been expansive, pushing his limits outward, projecting his ki into massive waves, and detonating his aura to shatter the environment around him. But the Null Realm was a predator that fed on expansion. Realizing this in the quiet intimacy of their shared grasp, Goku stopped pushing outward. He closed his hollowed eyes, drew a slow, deliberate breath, and inverted his energy. Instead of letting his ki flare into a fiery halo, he condensed it. He pulled the raw, golden warmth of his Saiyan life force deep into the very core of his being, compressing it until it became a dense, unyielding singularity of heat in his chest. Vados gasped, a soft, sharp sound that was instantly swallowed by the vacuum. But the vibration of it traveled through their joined hands. She felt the sudden gravitational pull of Goku's condensed spirit. It was not the destructive, overwhelming pressure of a god of destruction, but a localized, fiercely burning hearth. Her own divine energy, usually a cool, detached river that flowed smoothly through the cosmos, had been stagnating, freezing over without the Grand Priest's light to keep it in motion. Now, drawn by the immense, dense gravity of Goku's mortal will to survive, her dormant angelic ki began to thaw. She did not pull away. Instead, she surrendered the last of her pristine, untouchable distance. Vados intertwined her pale fingers seamlessly with his calloused ones, locking their grip. She closed her eyes, mirroring his meditative state, and guided her frozen silver energy into the radiant golden core he was building. The void pressed in from all sides, a crushing, lightless ocean desperate to extinguish them. But as their energies met, they created an invisible, impenetrable membrane. It was a perfect, paradoxical circuit. Goku provided the raw, combustible fuel of mortal defiance, and Vados provided the absolute divine control to keep that fire from burning out or being consumed by the dark. They ceased to drift aimlessly. Bound by their locked hands and their circulating ki, they became a binary star system in a universe of absolute zero. The maddening, deafening silence of the void was finally broken. It was not shattered by a battle cry or the roar of a Kamehameha, but by a sound far more profound. In the absolute dark, resonating solely through the connection of their skin and the intertwined flow of their spirits, the steady, rhythmic thrum of two heartbeats slowly synchronized into one defiant pulse. The struggle for immediate survival had ended. The agonizing wait for eternity had just begun. The first century dissolved into the void without a sound. In the absolute absence of celestial mechanics, time could only be measured by the rhythm of their merged breath and the steady, oscillating flow of their intertwined ki. They floated in the fathomless dark, locked in a meditative trance that demanded perfect, unbroken concentration. To lose focus for even a fraction of a second was to invite the crushing pressure of the Null Realm to collapse their fragile sanctuary. Goku and Vados became a closed circuit, a perpetual motion engine fueled by the friction of their opposing natures. Goku was the furnace. His Saiyan biology, designed by the cosmos to thrive on conflict and external pressure, had to be entirely repurposed. The aggressive outward explosion of power that defined his entire existence was meticulously folded inward. He learned to burn without consuming, radiating a profound localized heat that kept the creeping entropy of the void at bay. This was no longer the blazing, combative fire of a Super Saiyan, nor the reactive, evasive silver flash of Ultra Instinct, forged for the battlefield. It was a new, transcendent frequency of energy. It was the pure, distilled essence of the will to exist. He poured this golden, steady warmth into the palms of the angel, whose hands remained locked with his, offering her the raw vitality she had been severed from. Vados was the current. Stripped of the Grand Priest's infinite wellspring, she found herself drinking from the turbulent, endlessly regenerating river of a mortal soul. At first, the sensation was overwhelming. Angelic Ki was inherently cool, detached, and frictionless. A smooth silver mirror reflecting the universe without ever truly touching it. But Goku's energy was coarse, vibrant, and fiercely alive. As it flooded her spiritual pathways, it carried the echoes of a mortal life. Through their unbroken physical and spiritual connection, she felt the phantom sensations he harbored in his heart. The heat of a distant yellow sun, the scent of damp earth after rain, the agonizing sting of physical failure, and the euphoric, rushing high of breaking a limit. For a being who had observed the multiverse from an untouchable, apathetic distance for millions of years, this sudden influx of raw feeling was a cataclysm. The pristine ice of her divine composure melted entirely. Vados began to experience the terrifying, beautiful vulnerability of being finite. She felt the ache of isolation, the phantom chill of the void pressing against their invisible barrier, and most profoundly, an overwhelming, protective warmth toward the man anchoring her to existence. The lines of their hierarchy, the angelic attendant and the mortal warrior, were completely erased, burned away in the crucible of their shared survival. Decades bled into centuries, and a profound metamorphosis took root in the dark. They did not speak. The void would have stolen the sound, and words were too crude a vessel for the silent, unbroken conversation their souls were having. Goku learned the true, terrifying depth of angelic tranquility. He felt the vast, empty spaces between stars that Vados had walked, the burden of observing endless cycles of creation and destruction, and the profound loneliness of being a shepherd to temporary gods. Through her, his chaotic, battle-hungry spirit found an absolute, unshakable stillness. His mind expanded, no longer seeking an opponent to strike, but learning to simply be, a fixed point of light in an ocean of nothing. As their energies circulated, mortal heat flowing into divine coolness and serene grace structuring chaotic fire, the boundaries between their individual identities began to blur. They were no longer Goku and Vados, two separate entities struggling to keep the dark out. They had become a single, glowing anomaly in the center of the Null Realm, a halo of energy, swirling with the violent gold of mortal defiance and the tranquil silver of divine authority, cast a soft, persistent glow against the suffocating black. It was in this state of absolute, unprecedented harmony that the laws of the Omni-King were quietly, irrevocably broken. The universe demands balance, but it also fundamentally yearns for creation. Where two opposing forces of such magnitude achieve perfect synthesis, nature cannot remain stagnant. Deep within the fused resonance of their circulating ki, a spark ignited that belonged to neither of them, yet was composed entirely of both. The spark was not born of biology, but of an undeniable cosmic necessity. In a dimension defined by absolute erasure, the perfect synthesis of mortal defiance and divine grace demanded a manifestation. Vados felt it first. Within the continuous flowing circuit of their shared ki, a third rhythm emerged, a faint, fluttering pulse that disrupted the binary equilibrium of their survival. For millions of years, the angels of the multiverse did not multiply. They simply existed, immutable and eternal, spun from the direct will of the Grand Priest. To harbor new life was a profound deviation from the sacred order. It meant descending from the untouched pedestal of the divine and submitting to the chaotic, beautiful vulnerability of creation. As the realization washed over her, a single glowing tear escaped the angel's closed eyes, instantly vaporizing in the searing heat of their combined aura. It was a tear not of sorrow, but of a profound, shattering awe.
She squeezed Goku's hands, a sudden, desperate tightening that communicated the impossible truth across the silent vacuum of their minds.
Goku's consciousness, suspended in the deep, meditative void they had constructed, seized upon the anomaly. Through the joined conduits of their spirits, he felt the infant spark. It possessed a gravity unlike anything he had ever encountered. It carried the tranquil, unfathomable depth of ultra instinct. Yet it beat with the furious, drum-like ferocity of a Saiyan heart. The gestation defied all mortal understanding, stretching across centuries that blurred into an indefinite epoch of anticipation. This was a pregnancy fueled not by physical sustenance, but by the raw, circulating cosmic energy of two intertwined souls. Goku became the ultimate shield, pushing his condensed, blazing will to its absolute limit to expand their protective membrane of light. He fed the growing singularity with the memories of a blue sky, the scent of the ocean, and the unyielding joy of rising after a fall. Vados became the architect, carefully weaving the chaotic, explosive potential of the child into a stable, divine matrix, ensuring that the raw power did not consume them all from the inside out. But the Null Realm was a jealous warden. It sensed the anomaly. The void, which had previously been a passive, suffocating ocean, turned aggressive. The pressure against their spherical sanctuary multiplied exponentially. A crushing, localized gravity seeking to snuff out this unauthorized act of creation. The darkness writhed, striking against their gold-and-silver barrier with invisible, tidal force. Goku's muscles screamed in silent agony. His teeth gritted to the point of shattering as he poured every fraction of his life force into maintaining the shield. Vados, her pale skin glowing with a blinding translucent intensity, anchored his volatile energy with her absolute calm. Her mind focused entirely on the fragile universe expanding within her. They were no longer merely surviving. They were defending a future that the multiverse had never intended. The space between them grew impossibly heavy, vibrating with an energy signature that belonged neither to the gods of destruction nor the angels of creation. It was a new color on the spectrum of existence, a blinding, chaotic white gold that began to fracture the absolute dark of their prison. The invisible walls of the void groaned under the expanding pressure, the silence finally breaking into a low, terrifying hum that vibrated through the very marrow of their bones. The infant's power was reaching critical mass, demanding to be released into a reality that had no space for it. The light within their sanctuary swelled to an agonizing brilliance, blinding them both as the sheer, untamed magnitude of the child's ki threatened to detonate. The barrier of the void began to spiderweb with jagged, violent cracks of anti-light, unable to contain the birth of a living paradox. The hum escalated into a deafening roar, the precipice of a cosmic detonation that would either set them free or erase them entirely. The detonation did not produce flame, nor did it scatter debris. It birthed a localized Big Bang of pure, blinding white gold spirit. When the absolute zenith of the pressure finally shattered the membrane of their shared sanctuary, the 5 millennia reign of silence within the Null Realm was instantly annihilated. It was not broken by the frail, desperate cry of a newborn infant, but by the cataclysmic, tearing roar of an energy signature that the multiverse had never been designed to accommodate. The vacuum itself screamed as it was violently displaced by a tempest of chaotic, paradoxical ki. At the epicenter of this blinding storm floated the child. There was no physical form visible in those first terrifying seconds, only a raging singularity of conflicting absolutes. Silver ribbons of pristine, angelic purity whipped violently against jagged, golden arcs of primal Saiyan fury. The two greatest opposing forces in the cosmos, the divine mandate of absolute tranquility and the mortal imperative of infinite escalation, were warring for dominance within a single, fragile vessel. The resulting friction generated a shockwave so immense that the invisible walls of the void bowed outward, groaning under the threat of total dimensional collapse. Goku and Vados did not have a moment to marvel at their creation. The survival instinct that had kept them alive for centuries immediately shifted into a desperate, frantic overdrive. The sheer magnitude of the infant's uncontrolled output was a cosmic distress beacon, and worse, a gravitational nightmare. The Null Realm, reacting to this massive, unauthorized anomaly, began to collapse inward, threatening to crush the three of them into an infinitely dense point of non-existence. This was not a fight against a villain. This was a battle against the physics of erasure itself. It was the most desperate struggle of their lives. Breaking the meditative stance that had been his only posture for untold centuries, Goku lunged into the epicenter of the tempest. His body, atrophied by the stillness, but sustained by pure energy, ignited into the silver fire of ultra instinct. He thrust his hands directly into the swirling maelstrom of his child's aura. The heat was agonizing, a searing reflection of his own limitless potential turned wild and formless. He roared, his voice finally tearing through the void, not in anger, but in a desperate paternal command. He pushed his own ki against the expanding wave, acting as a physical and spiritual dampener, brutally wrestling the violent golden flames inward. Beside him, Vados moved with a terrifying ethereal urgency. The exhaustion of the metaphysical birth was buried beneath the fierce, sudden surge of a mother's necessity. Without her staff to channel her divine authority, she used her bare hands. Her pale fingers danced through the chaotic light, weaving complex, glowing runes of angelic scripture in the dark. She was constructing a localized sealing matrix, a divine cage to contain the explosive paradox before it shattered their reality. She threw the woven net of silver light over the expanding aura, her pristine features tightening in pain as the sheer force of the child's resistance threatened to shatter her physical form. "Hold it!" Goku's voice was a gravelly tearing sound, coarse from centuries of disuse. It was the first spoken word in an epic, carrying the weight of a fractured eternity. Vados did not answer, but her energy flared in silent, perfect synchronization. She pulled the ethereal strings of the matrix tight. Goku met her rhythm, matching his suppressing force perfectly to her divine seal. Together, they forced the explosive singularity to condense. The blinding white gold tempest was slowly, agonizingly compressed, pulled back from the brink of annihilation and folded inward. The blinding light dimmed, the deafening roar of raw ki fading into a heavy, vibrating hum. And there, hovering in the breathless space between them, the storm finally resolved into the delicate, breathing form of an infant. But as Goku reached out his scarred hands to cradle the child, the ambient space around the newborn warped and distorted with a terrifying latent density. They had survived the detonation, but as Vados looked upon the peaceful face of their child, the chilling reality settled over them, raising a being who instinctively rebelled against the concept of limits, in a prison of absolute nothingness, would demand a sacrifice of their very souls. The infant's eyes slowly opened, reflecting the dim, combined glow of its parents. Those eyes did not hold the innocent, unfocused gaze of a mortal newborn, nor the cold, detached vastness of an angelic being. They were a swirling, living twilight, the deep, endless black of a Saiyan iris fractured by crystalline, shifting bursts of silver starlight. The child did not cry. It simply looked at the absolute darkness that pressed against their fragile sanctuary and reached out a tiny, glowing hand, as if trying to grasp the concept of nothingness itself. Raising this paradox in a lightless grave demanded the total sacrifice of Goku and Vados' internal worlds. Because the Null Realm offered no earth to walk upon, no sun to warm the skin, and no wind to carry sound, they had to forge a universe from their own souls. Goku became the physical world. He burned his ki continuously, projecting a massive golden sphere of ambient heat to simulate the comforting gravity and warmth of a living planet. Within this localized domain, he taught the child the essence of the Saiyan spirit. He did not teach hatred, nor did he teach the blind pursuit of conquest. He stripped the Saiyan legacy down to its purest, most beautiful foundation, the absolute joy of the struggle. Through brutal, loving spars suspended in the zero-gravity vacuum, Goku passed down the memory of martial arts. When his strikes landed, sending the growing child tumbling through the dark, he taught them not to fear the pain, but to welcome it as proof of life. "Stand back up," his calloused hands communicated as he pulled the child back to its feet. "Every wall is just a door waiting to be broken. Every limit is an illusion." Vados, conversely, became the cosmos. She wove the silver threads of her angelic ki through Goku's golden domain, creating an intricate simulated tapestry of stars and celestial currents. She taught the child the profound, terrifying discipline of the divine. Where Goku taught the explosion of force, Vados taught the perfect, frictionless flow of water. She guided the child's mind outward, beyond the immediate physical sensation of combat, instilling the ancient angelic philosophy of absolute perception. She showed them how to dodge, not by reacting to a fist, but by feeling the intent behind the muscle, by reading the microscopic shifts in the fabric of reality before a strike was even conceived. Do not fight the current. Her serene, echoing presence whispered into the child's consciousness. Become the ocean itself. Let the universe move through you. In the outside multiverse, such opposing ideologies would have torn a mortal mind to shreds. To be a Saiyan is to scream against the heavens. To be an angel is to be the silent sky. But to a child born in the vacuum of non-existence, these were not contradictions. They were simply two halves of a perfect whole. Growing up entirely devoid of celestial hierarchy, galactic politics, or the petty tribalism of mortals, the child absorbed these lessons with terrifying clarity. They synthesized the raging, infinite escalation of their father with the absolute, untouchable tranquility of their mother. By the time the child reached the physical appearance of adolescence, the internal seal Vados had placed upon them at birth was no longer necessary. The violent, chaotic tempest of their dual nature had settled into a profound, unfathomable stillness. When the child moved, it was with the relaxed, swaying grace of ultra instinct. But the ambient pressure their body exerted on the void was heavy enough to rival a god of destruction. They did not just wield ki, they breathed it, manipulated it, and commanded it as if they were the author of reality itself. The 5,000-year mark was rapidly approaching. Goku's golden aura had grown pale from centuries of sustaining their localized world, his mortal body pushed to the absolute ragged edge of its lifespan, despite the preserving nature of their fusion. Vados, too, had dimmed, her divine essence exhausted by the sheer, unyielding effort of keeping the void at bay. They had given everything to forge the single, perfect blade. One evening, as the temporal weight of their sentence reached its absolute zenith, the child floated to the very edge of their glowing sanctuary. They placed a pale, steady hand against the invisible, crushing wall of the Null Realm. The void, which had relentlessly sought to devour them for 5 millennia, suddenly recoiled. A microscopic, terrifying fracture appeared under the child's palm, spiderwebbing outward with a sound like shattering glass. The cage was no longer a prison. It had become a cocoon, and the creature inside had finally outgrown it. The fracture beneath the child's palm did not simply widen, it detonated. For 5,000 years, the Null Realm had been an absolute, unbroken tomb. Now it was fragile glass, yielding to a diamond. The child did not roar, nor did they flare their aura in a display of exertion. They merely pushed, channeling the impossible, paradoxical weight of their existence into a single point of physical space. A web of blinding white gold light shot through the absolute black, branching out like a nervous system across the invisible walls of their prison. Then, with a sound that would echo backward and forward through the timelines of 12 universes, the dimension of erasure shattered. The transition was violent. The deafening, absolute silence of the void was instantly replaced by the overwhelming, chaotic symphony of the living multiverse. Time, which had pooled like stagnant tar for millennia, rushed over them in a torrential, dizzying flood. Colors that Goku and Vados had not seen in an epoch. The burning amber of distant nebulas, the cold blue of scattered starlight, the infinite, swirling violet of the cosmic ocean crashed against their retinas. The sheer sensory overload would have instantly crushed a mortal mind. But the family did not falter. They floated in the center of the sudden, vibrant expanse, surrounded by the dissipating shards of the void that rained down like melting snow. Goku took his first breath of real friction-filled space in 5 millennia. His lungs expanded, drinking in the ambient cosmic radiation, and a ragged, exhausted laugh tore from his throat. The golden ember he had guarded within his chest for so long roared back to life, feeding eagerly on the boundless energy of the universe. Beside him, Vados closed her eyes, her silver halo instantly reigniting into a brilliant, blinding ring. She felt the immediate, rushing reconnection to the divine network, the infinite web of creation re-establishing its hold upon her spirit. But the joy of their liberation was instantly eclipsed by the horrifying realization of what that reconnection brought with it. On his throne, at the absolute zenith of reality, the Grand Priest's eyes snapped open. For millions of years, his gaze had been a placid, unreadable mirror, reflecting the flawless order of Zeno's will. In this singular, terrifying microsecond, that mirror cracked. A harmonic dissonance had just erupted in the grand symphony of existence, a frequency so loud, so impossibly contradictory, that it threatened to drown out the Omni-Kings themselves. He felt the terrifying, serene stillness of an angel, braided violently with the untamed, escalating fury of a mortal Saiyan. It was a complete bypass of the established laws of creation and erasure. It was an anomaly that rendered the divine hierarchy obsolete. The Omni-Kings dropped their celestial game pieces, their wide, childlike eyes locking onto the distant coordinate of the disturbance in breathless awe. They did not understand the philosophical implications of the child's existence. They only saw a light that outshone their own. But the Grand Priest understood perfectly. This was not a mortal reaching the realm of the gods. This was a being born entirely outside the jurisdiction of divine law. It was a fundamental heresy. Across the 12 universes, the sudden, silent mandate of the Grand Priest struck the minds of the gods of destruction and their attendant angels like a physical blow. The command was absolute, devoid of the usual detached grace. Eradicate the anomaly. Preserve the cosmic balance. In the space where the Null Realm had just collapsed, Goku's laughter faded into a deadly, unyielding silence. His silver aura flared, shifting from the defensive warmth he had used to protect his family into the razor-sharp, combative edge of mastered Ultra Instinct. Vados raised her hand, her newly ignited divine energy coalescing into a brilliant, humming staff of pure light. They did not need to speak. They could feel the fabric of space-time warping violently around them as the divine vanguard mobilized. The cosmos themselves began to tear open, ripping violently at the seams as massive pillars of blinding, destructive purple light crashed down through the void, encircling the exiled Saiyan, the fallen angel, and the child who dared to rewrite existence. The pillars of Hakai energy solidified, revealing the supreme pantheon of the multiverse. 12 gods of destruction, their faces etched with a mixture of divine fury and uncharacteristic dread, formed a tight, suffocating ring. Beside them floated their angelic attendants, their expressions masked by the mandated, chilling neutrality of their order. Among them, Beerus's golden eyes widened, his jaw slacking as he recognized the ragged, fiercely glowing silhouette of the Saiyan he had once fought for sport. But this was not the mortal who had stumbled into the realm of gods. The energy radiating from Goku was impossibly dense, carrying the crushing, ancient weight of a surviving universe. We stared at his sister, his pristine composure fracturing as he sensed the fundamental shift in Vados' spirit. She was no longer a mirror reflecting the cosmos. She was the blazing sun at its center, her newly forged staff humming with a terrifying, protective gravity. The voice of the Grand Priest resonated not through the vacuum of space, but directly within their minds, carrying the cold, absolute weight of inescapable law. The anomaly is a disruption to the sacred mathematics of all creation. It must not be allowed to exist. Erase them. Bilmod, the god of destruction of Universe 11, was the first to strike. Driven by the sheer, terrifying implication of the child's existence, he hurled a massive sphere of concentrated Hakai directly at the family. The dark purple orb of erasure tore through the fabric of reality, screaming with the power to reduce even an immortal soul to absolute nothingness. Goku did not flinch. Vados did not raise her staff. It was the child who moved. Stepping past the protective boundary of their parents, the youth raised a single, pale hand. They did not slip into the fluid evasion of Ultra Instinct, nor did they attempt to overpower the strike with a roaring blast of Saiyan ki. Instead, the child simply caught the sphere of absolute destruction in their open palm. The universe seemed to hold its breath. For a fraction of a second, the purple energy raged against the child's skin, attempting to enforce the absolute law of the Omni-King. Then, the child gently closed their fingers. The Hakai did not explode.
It inverted. The dark, destructive energy unspooled into delicate, glowing ribbons of silver and gold light, flowing harmlessly over the child's shoulders before dissolving entirely into the cosmic wind. A suffocating, terrified silence fell over the vanguard of the gods. To nullify Hakai with overpowering energy was a profound feat of raw strength. To rewrite its very nature with a touch was a terrifying manipulation of reality itself. The child looked up, their twilight eyes locking onto the assembled deities with a profound, quiet sorrow. They had been born in the dark. They held no desire to bring that darkness out into the light. But as the 11 remaining gods of destruction roared in unison, igniting their auras and charging forward as one to enforce the Grand Priest's will, Goku and Vados stepped up to flank their creation. The battle that ensued was not a martial arts tournament. It was the unmaking of the sky. Goku intercepted the charging deities, his mastered Ultra Instinct no longer a purely reactive state, but a localized event horizon. When the gods struck at him, their fists met only the ghostly afterimage of his presence, while his retaliatory blows landed with the condensed gravitational force of a dying star. He fought with a ferocious, joyful serenity, a man who had stared into the abyss for 5 millennia and returned with its measure. Vados engaged her angelic siblings, their clash of silver staffs sending shockwaves that shattered nearby dead planets into dust. She did not fight with the detached elegance of her past. She fought with the grounded, fiercely partisan grit of a mother defending her blood. Her angelic magic laced with the heavy, unyielding warmth of mortal defiance. Yet even as Goku and Vados held back the cosmic hierarchy, the Grand Priest realized with a sickening clarity that the vanguard was failing. The child was not fighting. They were simply walking forward, the fabric of space-time bending and warping around their footsteps. Every blast of divine energy aimed at them was either absorbed into their twilight aura or gently redirected into the void. The order of the multiverse was crumbling before a being who recognized no master. Seeing the absolute futility of his forces, the Grand Priest closed his eyes, his hands trembling as he reached for the ultimate, terrible resort. The heavens cracked open with the blinding kaleidoscopic light, and the twin Omni-Kings descended upon the battlefield, their hands already glowing with the energy to erase all of existence. The descent of the Omni-Kings brought an absolute, suffocating halt to the celestial war. The 12 gods of destruction immediately ceased their assault, their terrifying auras snuffing out as they dropped to their knees in the vacuum of space, trembling before the supreme authority of the cosmos. The angels lowered their staffs, their expressions returning to a mandated, chilling neutrality. Goku and Vados drifted to a halt, their chests heaving, their intertwined energies still burning with a fierce, protective defiance. But the battlefield no longer belonged to them. The twin Zenos floated above the fractured remnants of reality, their blank, childlike eyes fixed upon the glowing, paradoxical youth who dared to unravel the grand design. There was no malice in the Omni-King's gaze, only the cold, mechanical instinct of a cosmic immune system responding to a fatal virus. The Grand Priest bowed deeply, his voice echoing with the finality of a closing tomb. The anomaly cannot be corrected. It must be excised. With a synchronized, terrifying innocence, the two Zenos raised their small, glowing hands. They did not charge an attack. They did not gather ki. They simply dictated the terms of reality. A blinding, absolute white light erupted from their palms, the energy of pure, unadulterated erasure. It was the same light that had wiped out entire universes in the blink of an eye, a wave of conceptual deletion that did not burn or crush, but simply commanded existence to stop. The wave expanded instantly, a silent, inescapable tsunami of nothingness rushing to consume Goku, Vados, and their child. Goku felt the temperature of the universe plummet, recognizing the horrifying, familiar touch of the void. Yet he did not raise his fist to fight it. Vados did not attempt to weave a barrier of divine magic. They had spent 5,000 years drowning in that exact same nothingness. They knew its weight, its taste, and its absolute futility against the fire they had forged. They simply drifted closer to their child, their golden and silver auras pulsing in quiet, unyielding solidarity. The wave of erasure washed over the youth, swallowing them in a blinding sphere of deletion. For an agonizing heartbeat, the Grand Priest allowed himself a shallow breath of relief, believing the mathematical perfection of the multiverse had been restored. But the light did not fade into the comforting black of empty space. Instead, the blinding white began to curdle, dimming into a swirling, heavy twilight. When the light finally broke, the child remained entirely untouched. A collective soundless gasp rippled through the pantheon of gods. The Omni-Kings tilted their heads in unison, their small hands still raised, an unprecedented flicker of confusion crossing their blank features. The Grand Priest's pristine composure shattered into a million irreparable fragments. The erasure energy, capable of reducing the grandest galaxies and the oldest gods to mere memory, was quietly swirling around the child's fingertips like obedient water. The child looked up at the lords of all creation, their twilight eyes radiating a profound, heavy sorrow. They did not speak, but the projection of their spirit echoed through the minds of every deity present. How do you erase a being who was conceived in the absolute zero of non-being? How do you condemn a soul to the void when the void was their cradle? The Null Realm had been the ultimate expression of erasure, a 5 millennia sentence of absolute nothingness. The child was not just immune to the void, they were its master. Erasure held no dominion over a heart that had learned to beat in the dark. Gently, the youth opened their hand, and the residual energy of Zeno's ultimate attack simply dissolved, turning into harmless glowing embers that drifted away on the cosmic wind. The ultimate weapon of the divine hierarchy had been rendered entirely obsolete. The absolute law of the cosmos had just been broken, not by force, but by the undeniable, transcendent right to exist. The silence that followed was not the oppressive dead quiet of the Null Realm, but the breathless stillness of a paradigm shifting. The Grand Priest, the eternal architect of universal law, slowly lowered his hands. For the first time since the dawn of creation, he did not know what to command. The flawless arithmetic of existence had encountered an impossible variable, a living paradox that could not be solved by addition or subtraction. Beside him, the twin Omni-Kings floated downward, their innate instinct to erase entirely subdued by a profound, uncharacteristic curiosity. They drifted toward the youth, their tiny hands reaching out not to destroy, but to touch the glowing twilight aura that had so effortlessly defied their absolute mandate. Goku and Vados did not raise their guards. The fierce combative fire of mastered Ultra Instinct faded from Goku's form, leaving only the warm, golden baseline of his mortal spirit. Vados lowered her staff, the blinding, combative light of her angelic magic softening into a gentle lunar glow. 5,000 years in the dark had burned away the Saiyan's thirst for endless battle, and the angels' reliance on detached authority. They had learned the ultimate truth of the void: destruction, even in the name of absolute justice or self-defense, was just another form of emptiness. They had not survived an eternity of nothingness merely to replace one pantheon of unfeeling gods with another. Sensing their parents' absolute peace, the child stepped forward to meet the Omni-Kings. They did not bow, nor did they strike. Instead, the youth closed their eyes, took a slow, deep breath, and released the metaphysical sanctuary that Goku and Vados had so painstakingly built in the dark. It was a spiritual subjugation, unlike anything the multiverse had ever witnessed. The child projected their inner realm outward, a sweeping, invisible tidal wave of pure emotion and lived experience that flooded the divine domain. It washed over the trembling gods of destruction, piercing their calloused, immortal hearts with the forgotten warmth of mortal struggle. Beerus gasped, dropping to his hands and knees as he was suddenly overwhelmed by the agonizing, beautiful sensation of rising after a devastating fall. A mortal friction he had never allowed himself to feel. The wave flowed through the angels, shattering their mandated neutrality. Whis closed his eyes as his hollow silver spirit was suddenly filled with the fierce, burning weight of genuine, unconditional love, finally understanding the profound sacrifice his sister had made. Even the Grand Priest and the Omni-Kings were enveloped in this breathtaking synthesis of chaotic fire and serene grace. They felt the crushing, localized gravity of the Null Realm, the desperate synchronization of two heartbeats in the absolute dark, and the triumphant, radiant joy of forging light where none was permitted to exist. In a single transcendent instant, The rigid pyramidal hierarchy of the cosmos was rendered obsolete. The gods did not fall in bloody defeat. They were elevated. They were forced to experience the undeniable truth that true perfection was not found in absolute control or absolute erasure, but in the harmonious, messy intertwining of limitation and evolution. The child had not conquered the 12 universes with a fist or a blast of overwhelming ki. They had completely rewritten the fundamental frequency of reality with a heartbeat. The Grand Priest, his eyes wet with a sudden, overwhelming understanding of a universe he thought he had mastered, slowly descended to his knees. It was not a gesture demanded by protocol, but a spontaneous submission to a higher state of being. The gods of destruction and the angels followed, a silent wave of reverence rippling through the shattered heavens. The Omni-Kings, their blank expressions replaced by a profound, radiant joy, hovered peacefully in the presence of their new heir, entirely content to relinquish the burden of absolute erasure to a being who understood the absolute value of life. Goku and Vados stood together, their hands naturally finding one another and intertwining just as they had in the darkest depths of their exile. They watched the cosmos bow, not to overwhelming power, but to the ultimate culmination of their survival. A boundless new cosmic era had dawned, forged from the synthesis of the mortal and the divine, birthed in the absolute zero of non-being. As the shattered fabric of space-time gently wove itself back together, painting the sky with the vibrant, reborn colors of a united multiverse, the heavens finally found their true center. The stars burned quietly, as if remembering their will.